Hello everyone, and welcome back to part 3 of the Beyond Monkeys 2 video series. In the last session, we ended up building a backend API service for our Snippet mobile application. So in this video and onwards, we will actually start building the .NET MAUI application. So let us start with Visual Studio. In part 1, I already gave you a good introduction to all the features and we listed down everything that we wanted to do. In part 2, we built the backend using ASP.NET Web API project, and now we are going to start building a .NET MAUI project. So let me actually go ahead and start with a new project altogether. So I'm going to choose a .NET MAUI app. I'm using Visual Studio for Mac, but feel free if you want to use Visual Studio for Windows, Visual Studio 2022. It is the same thing. So let us continue. It is going to ask you what target framework you want to use. I am going to stick to .NET 6. I did notice some issues in this application with .NET 7. So that is the reason I'm resorting back to .NET 6. But if you are feeling adventurous, please feel free to start with .NET 7 project. And as and when you encounter any issues, please work with the MAUI team and have those rectified. So I'm going to continue with .NET 6 project. The project name I'm going to give it as, let's call it Snppts Snippets App. By the way, I will not be publishing the source code of this project on GitHub. Rather, what I will do, and I have done, I have put in all the resources required for this project on my GitHub. I will show that to you in a moment. Let us actually go ahead and create the project first. So I'm going to create this project. Let's go ahead and create the project. So it is creating the project. Let me minimize the toolbar or toolbox, or in fact, let's actually remove it. We do not need this. This is a simple .NET MAUI application. Let me just deploy it to my simulator just to test it out. So first time it is taking some time to run. Build is successful. And now it is trying to connect. Yes, the application is up and running. I am using M1 Pro. I do not know, I noticed an issue first time when I build the application. The splash screen takes a long time, but after some time it is fine. I do not know what the issue is, but this seems to happen only for the first time. So here you go. This is a plain vanilla .NET MAUI application. Nothing fancy about this. So let's go ahead and stop this. Now before we proceed further, I mentioned that some of the resources I've already put on my GitHub page. So let's actually go over there. I have already shared the link to this repo, which is under github.com/naveed/MAUI samples. So here you will actually find a folder called MAUI snippets. If you go inside this folder, so there is a folder which is database script. If you go into the database script, you will see the actual database SQL script required to create the SQL Server database if you want to run it yourself, and also the sample data. So not actually the sample data, this data as of I think last week when I started recording. So everything which was there on the Snippets web application, that is all there in this. The other project I have is the Web API app project. This is actually the ASP.NET Web API project that we built last time. So I published the source code for that. And the last one is the MAUI app project. So here you can find, I have a folder called fonts. These are some of the fonts that we will be using. We have a folder for images, all the images that I'll be using in this project. And then additionally, there are a couple of folders which I have created. One is the maui.apps.framework and the other is pan card view. I will come to these as and when we require them. You can actually take the code from here and you can start using it. Other thing that I have done for those of you who do not want to build their own web API app and deploy it anywhere on the internet, I have actually created a JSON file with all the data output. So you can actually go ahead and you can just click on the raw, and this is the URL that you can use. So in our case, we will see that this is the URL that we can use if you don't want to deploy it yourself. So this is the project resources that you can make use of. So first thing first, let me actually go ahead and close out everything. So this is the project. It's a simple project. What I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to bring in some fonts. I'm going to delete these default fonts that came in, and maybe I'll just bring in the fonts that are required. So I need the regular and the semi-bold font. You can find those. I'm going to bring them in over here to under my fonts folder. Now I do have an issue with Visual Studio for Mac. For some reason I noticed when I copy or I drop something, it does not default it to Maui font. So I'm going to change it to Maui font individually for both of them. So let's change it to Maui font. But on Visual Studio for Windows, I did not find this issue at all. Similarly, under the images, I will bring in all the images which are required. So let me just bring in all these images over here. So you can see there are some images for example, for adding an icon. Okay, it's not opening up, but you can open it up. Let me just open up one of them. For example, icon add. So this is the add icon. I can open up maybe the icon for the filter. So this is the application icon that we will use for filtering and so on. Now, one of the additional things you will notice, again, Visual Studio for Mac issue, none of these are set to Maui image. Now, one simple way is I can go for each of them and I can change them to Maui image. Or an easier way for me is I can actually go ahead. This is only a VS for Mac issue. You don't have to worry about it on Windows. I can go ahead and I can fix it. So let's go and look at the resources. It seems to have removed this, or is it fixed? Let's actually go to the properties. So seems like some issue. Anyways, what we will need to do, we will need to change all of these to, let me pin this for the time being, and we will need to change it to Maui image. And I cannot also multi-select and change it. That for some reason does not work. I hope that the Visual Studio team fixes this very soon. First of all, when adding something to this folder, that should be fixed. And secondly, allowing to multi-select and changing the properties. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to maybe pause the recording and come back to this. So I have changed the properties for all of these to Maui image. So we are done with our resources folder. Now we need to actually start making use of these fonts. So I'm going to go to my Maui program and I'm going to put in my actual fonts. So instead of using these two font, the ones which are registered by default, I'm going to replace them with the fonts that I brought in over here. So these are the couple of fonts, Titanium Web, regular and semi-bold, and I'm going to provide them with an alias, regular font and medium font. So that is how we set it up. The other thing that we will be using, we'll be using a couple of packages. So let me actually go and bring in or add the packages before even we start. So one thing we will need for sure is the community toolkit.mvvm package, if I can spell it right. Yeah, so community toolkit.mvvm. So I'm going to go ahead and add this package. And the other one we'll be using is the monkeycage.filestore. It says could not add the package. I'm using the latest one, that's fine. Community toolkit.mvvm package. Okay, now it seems to be working. It has added it. The other one I'm going to use is the monkeycage.filestore. So let's actually go ahead and add that as well. So I'm going to say monkey cache. Let's search for monkey cache and .file store. So I'm going to, this time around, I'm going to take the pre-release one, because the version 2.0.0 beta is the one which is compiled for .NET MAUI. So I'm going to bring this in. Now I would highly recommend for those of you who have not watched my previous series Beyond Monkey, where I have built a YouTube clone application. There I have spent the first 3-4 videos talking about building the framework. A lot of the things that we are doing, especially on this monkey cache.file store, how we are using it, and also community toolkit.mbvm, how we'll be making use of. I've explained all of those in depth in that video series. So I would highly recommend that you go ahead and at least watch the first 2 or 3 parts, and that will give you some basic understanding. We will be utilizing many of the things that I discussed over there, but I'm not going to be explaining any of those in details over here. So the other thing I'm going to now do is, let's minimize this, let's keep everything clean. I'm going to add a global usings class, because I do not want to have my using statements or using statements defined in each of the my CS file. So let's actually go ahead and add a new class. I'm going to call this global usings. So this is our global usings class, and we can simply remove out everything from here. We do not need this. So perhaps what we can do here is we can bring in some of the namespaces that we know right now we will be using. For example, community toolkit.mvvm.component model, and it is complaining could not be found. We did add the dependencies. Let's check quickly. Monkey cache is added. Let's actually go ahead and have a look at our NuGet packages. Not sure if something has changed. Monkey cache .file store. So I'm going to take in the beta, add the package. It says adding package and package added successfully. Let me actually try to rebuild this. So this one is gone, but community toolkit is still giving me an error. Okay, let's go ahead and manage NuGet packages again. Community toolkit.mvvm. So I do not want the pre-release. Version 8 looks fine to me. Add the package, accept. It says it is added successfully. Okay, now it has disappeared. Not sure what the issue was. Maybe some bug in the latest version of Visual Studio for Mac. The other thing that I want to do is I'm going to edit this project, and I'm going to do some cleanup over here. So for example, I'm not going to be supporting Tizen. Maybe I do not want to support Mac Catalyst, so I can remove it altogether. I do not want to support Windows, so I can remove this Windows as well. What is the root namespace, single project? What is the name of the application? So let us call this application SNPPTS. This is the name of our application. What is the application ID? So we can call it, this one seems fine. Version 1 is fine. Here it is iOS Mac Catalyst. We do not need, we can remove this. I just want to keep the folder structure and everything clean. So similarly, Windows and Tizen I do not need, I can remove them. Everything else we can keep it as such. Nothing else needs to be changed. Let me just save this. It is going to load the project, and Visual Studio for Mac unfortunately does all of this mess up over here. For some reason it just clutters everything. We can go ahead and we can clean it up, but let's leave that for the time being. The other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add some folders to this. So let's add some folders that we will be making use of. So let's create a folder called base. This is where some of our base user interface components or base view model will be going. Add another folder, we will call it, say, converters. As you will see, we'll be making use of some converters. Add say views, or let's start with the models. So we have models, views, some view models. We will also have some helpers that we will make use of. If required, we can add them. So let me create a folder called helpers. We can have services folder. So of course we'll be defining some services. Services, this will be the API service that we will use to fetch the information from our API. And lastly, just like we have the views folder, I will also create a folder for view controls. This is where we will put in reusable controls that we can make use of again and again within our project. And if nothing else, at least it will be easier to manage. In terms of our XAML files, it will be clean code. We know not everything is nested in one big page file. So let's add another one, and we will call it view controls. So these are the different folder structures that we need to create. Now, one thing we will need to do, we will need to add this other project, the MAUI framework. This is something that we built last time around in our Beyond Monkeys 1 series. So you can actually go ahead, copy the folder from that project into this project, or to make it easy, I have in this GitHub repo, the one I was talking about, I have put this folder over here. So you can just download and you can just refer to this project. It has a set of converters, some extension methods, some MVVM components, some user interface components, some services, and so on. So in my case, I'm just going to go ahead and add this project. So let me actually go ahead, add this project, and we have this project over here. So I'm just going to bring this project as such. I'm not going to explain what is there in this project. You can have a look at that previous video. And now I can actually add the reference to this project in my snippet application. So this project reference has been added. Now what we will be doing, so under the views, we are going to be having certain views. So just to let you know, I am not an app shell fan, so I will not be using app shell or the main page that comes out of the box. I'll be defining all my pages over here. So let me actually go ahead and create some pages. Right now I'm just going to create these pages without any logic. We will build up on this as needed. So I'm going to call it a start page. This is the application that this is the page that will come up when the application is launched. You can also consider it as your dashboard page. So we have a start page. We will have a snippet details page. So SNPP, or let's call it snippet details page. This is the page that we will use for displaying the details about the snippet. We will have another page, perhaps an about page. Let's put something for the about page. This is where you can give credit to Gerald and Steven and the Snppts web application for this project. So this is the about page. You may have a settings page or a favorites page or add snippets page. You can add all of these. So I'm just going to bring them in. Let's call it settings page. Settings page. We will have one for add new snippets page. We will have one for now one of the things I did not show you, let me see if I can show you right now. If I run the application, so there is also an image viewer that we have built. So if we go into the application, so it is fetching the data from the internet. If I go over here If I go down, this one does not have any images, something else that has an image. Let's go down, look at the image. If I click on this, you will notice it brings in this image. So there is I think using option on Mac, I believe, yeah, I can zoom in on this as well. So this is also an image viewer page that we will be building. So let's call it an image viewer page. Now for all of these pages, equivalently, I would need the view models. So these are all the views that we have. I will need to have view models for each of them. So let's start with, from the top, we have the about page view model. Not typing. About page view model. So we have one, we have got add new snippet page. So let's add that class. Add new snippet page view model. We have got image viewer page view model. Image viewer page view model. We have got settings page view model. So ideally, for every page that you have, you should have a view model as well. So this one is snippet details page view model, snippet details page view model, and lastly the start page view model. Start page view model. So these are all the view models that we have created. We are just going to leave them as such for now, not going to touch anything on these, just leaving them for the time being. Now once this structure is set up, what I can do is I can go ahead, I can actually remove my app shell and my main page.xaml along with the CS files. I do not need them. I can go ahead and I can delete them, and then in my app.xaml.cs file, instead of pointing to app shell, I can actually say go ahead and give me a new navigation page, and this will point to a new start page. And of course it is expecting us to using namespace. This looks very odd. It should be giving the using statements. I think something has changed with the latest version of Visual Studio for Mac. So anyways, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my global usings and I can put this over here. So global using, what is the namespace? It is Snppts App dot views. So this should fix this for me. Yeah, here you go. Now while we are in this page, though not required, it is totally up to you. I usually prefer to add version tracking to my application. So what you can do, basically, you can just bring in the version tracking. All you need to do in your app.xaml.cs file after the initialize component, you just call version tracking.track. Now this will start tracking the version changes in your application as and when you deploy new versions. Or you can check if you are running this application for the first time ever, or you're running this application first time for this version, and so on. And then you can decide to do either some migrations, maybe pop up some message to inform the users of the new features in your app and so on. Though we will not be doing this in this project, I usually suggest that you keep it, because you never know in future, if required, you can make use of it. So just leave it over there, no harm. If you don't want it for sure, then you can remove it. But if you leave it in future, if something is required, you can actually go ahead and you can use them. So the other thing, let's come back to the project. The other thing I'm going to do, I am not going to be using any of the default styles which are provided to me by .NET MAUI. So I'm actually going to go ahead and delete them. I do not need these. Similarly, in my app.xaml file, let's actually do some cleanup. I want everything to look neat. So, and with this, I can actually go ahead and I can remove these reference to these colors and styles.xaml files, which we just deleted. So I can leave it empty. So it's simple. So let's hide this. So this is our app.xaml. Another thing we are going to do in our helpers, we are going to create a new class and I'm going to call it service helpers. Again, have a look at the previous video series Beyond Monkeys 1. There I will be talking about what we are going to be using this for. So it is a simple service helpers class. Let me remove this and just copy paste it from the previous project. This is the one that we will be using to get access to our services anywhere in the application. So it's a simple services helper class which only has one method, static method, which is get services, and you provided the interface that you want the service for, and it will get you the services using the internal some of these methods. For example, on Windows it will be using MAUI Win UI application services. On iOS it will be using MAUI application delegate services, and so on. So you can use that. I'm not going to be explaining it in details over here. Now under the models, let's go ahead and add a class called constants. So just again to do some cleanup, remove this, put a semicolon so that it cleans it up, and I'm going to change it to a static class, remove the constructor, and I'm going to bring in some variables. Again, not going to explain to you in details what these variables are, but just one for the application name. Let's call it Snppts App. The email address that we can use, application ID that we will use for caching. Let's put this application ID as xgeno.snppts.mobile app. This is the API URL. So this is, you remember in part 2 we built our backend API service. So here is where I'm going to put in my web server. Again, for the purpose of this video, I'm not going to do it on screen. I've just kept it as my URL. Off screen, once I close this file, I'll change that to my web server name. I'm not going to give that web server name to anyone because you never know, it can get hammered or it can be brought down. I noticed that last time I by mistake I shared my YouTube API key in the project file when I checked it into GitHub, and then everyone was using the same key and my account got locked. So I'm not going to provide this over here. So you can deploy the code which we mentioned over here in this project. So if I go back to mobile snippets, and this is the web API project that we built, you can again download it, you can deploy it anywhere, and then you can use that server name. Or if you do not have that luxury, I have also put in this URL where I have provided the static JSON file. So if you go back to this project over here, so we have this snippets file. So you go to this file, click on raw, it will give you the full raw URL for this. Yeah, let's actually click on it. Yeah, and then leaving out the snippet part. So leave this snippet part, remove the snippet part, and then choose everything else. So this is the URL that you can use. And then for the purpose of animations, you will see when I'm building something, I usually put in some animations. This is the standard that I use. I go from 100 milliseconds to around 1.8 seconds because it is anyways not a good practice to have your animation spanning more than 2 seconds. So these are different durations for different elements that I will use, some combinations, some 100 milliseconds, some 300, some 600 milliseconds, some 1.2 seconds, and one which is an extra long duration for some reason if I want to really emphasize on it or something to fade in very, very slow, maybe I'll use a 1.8 seconds. So these are this is the constants.cs file that we will use. Now while we are at it, though I'm not going to be showing this, again this is something which I had shown in the previous series, that what you can do on Android if you want to make the application bar transparent at the top. So what you can do over here is you can just bring in this configure lifecycle events. So basically you just say if it is an Android lifecycle event, and when the Android application is created, you just call this function, which is make status bar translucent or transparent, and passing in the activity. And this is the transparent path, sorry, the transparent, make transparent code. Very simple piece of code that we are writing. We are just setting the flags to clear for the whole of the UI screen. That's it. That's all we are doing. So you can actually get the code again if you want from the Tube Player application. It is all available over there for those of you who want to run this application under Android. Now once this one is done, what we will do is we will go ahead to our Maui program again, and this is where we will now start registering some services. So I am going to call it I'm going to create a method called register services. I could have done this directly over here, but I rather keep everything clean. So I will say register services. I'll create a new function called register services, and I will pass in my builder.services. So this builder that I'm building over here, this Maui application, so I'm just going to pass it, and this actually is going to be a static. Let's make it a private static void, does not return anything, register services, and the builder.services is a iServices collection. So iServices collection, and let's call it services. Is fine. So this is a simple method. So we'll register our services over here. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy paste some code. I'm not going to type in everything, but I will explain what this code is doing. So we are going to add a singleton for iConnectivity. This is to check if we are connected to the internet. This is one of the services, a singleton we will add, because we do not want to initiate this again and again. Similarly, for this constant application ID, so this is the cache barrel, sorry, that the one that we will be using from the monkey cache to cache the data into the local cache. So we do not want to go to internet every time to whenever we are making the API call. So maybe we can have some logic built into our application that is into our application saying that okay, this particular web API call should be cached for 2 hours or 8 hours or 2 days or 1 month, whatever it is. So during that time it should not be. So this is the setup. So I'm just registering this cache barrel with my monkey cache file store cache barrel, and I'm adding this as a this cache barrel, current cache barrel, I'm adding it as a singleton so I can make use of it everywhere on the page. Now again, if you want to learn about more details about these things, and you can go to my Beyond Monkeys 1 series, and at least in the first 2, 3, 4 parts, at least 2 or 3 parts, I'm explaining all of them in details. And then I am registering a singleton for my start page view model, and I'm going to be registering transients for my, let's actually bring this view models. Somehow it is not taking it. So let me go ahead and let me add them over here, view models. Something is wrong with the new version of, and this one is add snippet, add new snippet page view model. So these are the view models that we will be doing. So the difference is the singletons I'm adding where I will not be passing in any specific data, but wherever I need to pass any specific data which I need to recreate again and again, I should be creating them as transient. For example, my snippet details page, maybe add new snippets page. Again, the about page does not need to be, so I can change it. My settings page does not need to be, so I can change it to singleton. And my image viewer, because every time it will be different image that we will be doing. And I have left it as, you know, register services part, which we will define later as and when we go ahead with the project. So with this one, let me actually go ahead, and if you remember, so let me actually just, while we are at this, so you see this is the JSON that we are getting, and now we need to convert it to our classes. So one simple way is if I can just convert it to raw, get all of this data, and I can go to either quicktype.io. Let's go to quicktype.io, open the app, or you can use JSON to C#. You can paste this in. Let's say I want to generate it to C#. Whether I want to use Newtonsoft or system.text.json, I'm going to use system.text.json, and so on. And then I can copy paste this code over here. Now, one thing you will notice that unnecessarily it is generating, in fact, not unnecessarily, it is generating these mappings, which is the same name with the same property name. If you remember, when we were building the web API, we built the web API in such a way that the data that we are getting is exactly in the same Pascal casing. So theoretically, we do not need this. So I can just copy this, and then I can remove all of these. So I do not need any of these. This will keep my code clean. So with this, let me actually go ahead and we do that. So in our models, I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to call this app models. So let's remove this app models. Maybe I can remove this whole class, and whatever data, whatever you are seeing over here, the output, you can push it over here, and you can see it is doing a lot of stuff. So that's why I prefer to use JSON to C#, because that generates much cleaner code for me. So I personally prefer this. So let's say convert, and this is the output that it has created, and you can see here it did not create any of those. So I can actually go ahead and I can copy paste this part. So here we can bring in all this code that we created. So this is the snippets result, which is coming back, which is the list of authors of snippets. This is the author, this is the snippets, the app category, and the images. Okay, so our models are done. And if I go to the MAUI program, just to make sure that we have MAUI lifecycle events, I will leave it over here, because this is only used in this CS file. It is not going to be used across the project. But this Snppts App.models, this is something which will be used again and again. So I should rather move it to my global usings file. So let's call it global using Snppts App.model. So this one we can close. App.xaml, let's keep this open for now. We'll be working with it. Okay, so we also now need to add some services. You remember we said there are some services, if I go down, some services that we'll be adding later. So let's talk about that. So here, this is where we are going to be building some services that we will be using. So I'm going to be adding a couple of services. So let me actually go ahead and create an empty interface, and I'm going to call it iSettings service. Okay, so let's clean this up. And in this interface, all I'm going to have is just a sort order. I will explain what this sort order is going to be later on. So just a sort order. And then I am going to add another service. Again, it's going to be an empty interface. Let's call it API service. Okay. I wish Visual Studio can default it to this new structure. I am not sure why I have to do this. So public interface API service, what are we going to do in this? Maybe I'm going to be returning a list of my snippets. So it's going to be a task of my SNPPTS results, I believe we called it result. and get snippets. So this is just a method that we are going to add. So get snippets, this is the method that we will be calling. So these are the two services that we have. Once we have these two services, what we need now, we need to define concrete definition of these services. So we have got just the interfaces. We need to define the concrete definition. So I can create my app setting service. Let me create app setting service. So do some cleanup. I am not going to type in everything, just going to bring this. So my app setting service is derives from the observable object, and I am inheriting, it inherits from or derives from observable collection, and it implements the I setting service. That's why we have to implement the sort order. So public sort order, I'm not using the community MVVM kit, default MVVM kit, because I want to do certain something over here. So whenever a user changes, so for example over here, if you see, if I change my sort order to surprise me, so I want this to persist, which means even if I kill the application and I launch the application again in future, it will default that to surprise me every time. So you see, random. If I again kill it, I start, it will always be this. But if I change it to say popular, then every time I open the application, I want it to be popular. So that's what I'm saving it in the shared preferences. So I'm just using preferences.get. It's a Boolean variable, string variable, and I'm defaulting it to latest. So when I say latest, we have got popular, latest, and surprise me. Surprise me, internally I'm saving it as random. So this is just a name that I'm displaying over here. So this is the get and the set method for that. That's the reason I'm not using the default implementation or the source generators for this purpose. The other one we are going to create is another class. This one is going to be a Snppts API service. So let's create a Snppts API service class. And again, I'm going to just bring it over here, something very simple. Let me copy paste it here. So it is a simple Snppts API service class, which is implementing the I API service, and it is inheriting from REST service space. Where is the REST service space coming from? This REST service space is coming from our frameworks project, which is over here, the one that we added. So this is a helper that I have written, which does all of the heavy lifting, including checking for whether you have internet connection or not, whether you want to use cache or not, whether you want to serve it from cache, save it to cache, and so on. It does all of that for you, and also it converts it to your the actual output type that you want. For example, in this case, we are converting it to, where is that? We are converting it to a snippets result over here. So it will convert that all for you automatically. So this is saying it does not have a connectivity. Something is wrong with the community toolkit is added. Microsoft.maui. I think I'll need to rebuild this. This clean. Oh, restores packages need to be restored. Let's do a restore packages. So hopefully this error will go away. Yes, so once I restore the packages, those errors disappeared. So let me put this in the new line. So basically this Snppts API service is deriving from this REST services base, which has a set of helper methods. So you remember, this is the method that we defined, which is the public list async task, snippets result, get snippets. All it is doing is it is saying get is async snippets results, calling the resource as snippets. So where is that snippets coming from? If we go back, let me minimize this, go back to my constants class. So for this URL that we pass /snippets at the end, and this is the resource it is going to get us, and we are caching that for 4 hours. And while we are constructing this service, because it is driving from this, it requires the access to the I connectivity, which we are injecting through dependency injection. If you go back to your Maui program, this is where we are injecting this. It is going to get this from there. And similarly, the I cache barrel, which again is injected as a singleton over here. So it is making use of that. We just pass that to our base class, and then we set the base URL to constants.api service URL, and this is the API service URL which we are making use of. So this is our API service class. Once we have defined these actual services, then what we need to do is we can actually now remove this later part. It is not later. We are going to define it here now. So we are going to add a singleton for I setting service. So quick actions. Okay. Yeah, using snippets.services. So I'm adding a singleton for my I setting service, and the concrete implementation is app setting service. And for the I API service, it is Snppts API service. And being a good citizen, I'm going to move that to my global using. So anywhere else where I need to make use of this services class, I have access to that everywhere. So my project looks very clean. So this is our implementation. So let's take a pause over here. In part 4, we will continue building up on this application.